All right, let's do this. Today we're diving into Søren Kierkegaard.
Oh, buckle up. He's a fascinating one.
You gave us a ton of stuff on him, so we're going to
Yeah.
try to unpack as much as we can. He's this Danish philosopher, right?
Yeah.
I keep seeing him called like the father of existentialism.
Yeah, that's a common label for him.
Okay, and his work, I mean, I've started reading a little bit of it, and it can get pretty intense.
Oh, it's not light reading. He really makes you think.
Yeah.
It's challenging,
Yeah.
but it's so rewarding.
Okay, so hopefully we can make it a little more accessible
Yeah.
for folks today. So one thing that really struck me, and I think you touched on this a little bit in your notes, is that Kierkegaard was writing in the 19th century, right?
Yeah.
During this time when philosophy was like all about these big systems.
Yeah, grand narratives,
Yes.
trying to explain everything. Yeah, like the universe, history, the whole shebang.
Right, like fitting all of human experience into like this perfect little system.
Yeah. Right, like a giant puzzle where everything fits neatly together.
And
Except Kierkegaard wasn't buying it.
it sounds like Kierkegaard really wasn't into that. He was more about the individual
Exactly.
on like their unique experience.
He thought those big systems missed the point completely. They forgot about the actual living, breathing person.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like they were so busy looking at the forest, they missed the trees, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was all about like what it actually feels like to exist, to make choices, to be a person in the world.
Okay, so instead of just thinking about these abstract concepts, he was more interested in the lived experience of
Yeah.
the individual.
He was digging into the nitty-gritty of what it means to be human.
And from what I understand, he was particularly critical of this one big philosophical system that was dominant at the time, Hegel's absolute idealism.
Hegel. Yeah, he was the big guy on campus back then.
Right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Hegel's basic idea was that there's this universal spirit or mind that's unfolding throughout history.
Right, and it's this rational process, kind of like a master plan. And individuals are just, well, kind of along for the ride.
So we're all just playing our assigned roles in this cosmic play with no real freedom to choose our own paths.
That's kind of how it goes with Hegel. It's like we're all just cogs in this giant machine.
And Kierkegaard was like, nope, not buying it.
Yeah. He pushed back hard against that. He was like, hold on, what about individual freedom? What about personal choice?
So he's emphasizing that we do have a choice.
He absolutely insisted on it. He said that the individual is not just some pawn in this grand scheme, but a free agent who can choose their own path.
Okay, I'm starting to see why he's considered the father of existentialism, this idea of radical freedom and responsibility.
Oh, definitely. He lays the groundwork for a lot of existentialist thought that came later.
So instead of looking for answers in these big overarching systems, Kierkegaard is saying we need to look inward to our own experiences.
Yes. He believed that truth isn't some objective thing out there waiting to be discovered. It's something you create through your choices, your actions, your whole way of being in the world.
So instead of objective truth, he's talking about subjective truth.
Precisely. He says that truth is subjective, it's personal, it's lived, it's felt.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. But, and maybe this is a silly question, but if truth is subjective, doesn't that mean that anything goes?
That's a great question, and one that a lot of people wrestle with when they first encounter Kierkegaard. He wasn't saying that all beliefs are equally valid or that there's no such thing as right and wrong.
Oh, okay.
What he was saying is that truth isn't something you just passively receive from some external authority. It's something you actively create through your choices, your commitment, your whole way of being in the world.
So it's not just about what you think, but about how you live.
Exactly. It's about putting your beliefs into action, about living a life that reflects your values.
That makes sense. It's more about authenticity then.
Absolutely. Authenticity is a huge theme for Kierkegaard.
Yeah.
He believed that we have a responsibility to be true to ourselves, to figure out what we believe, and then live in accordance with those beliefs.
That's a powerful idea.
It is, and it can be pretty challenging, too.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it's a lot easier to just go with the flow, to follow the crowd,
Yeah.
than to actually stop and think for yourself.
It definitely is. But Kierkegaard would say that the easy path isn't always the most fulfilling path.
So how do we do it? How do we figure out what we truly believe and then have the courage to live by those beliefs?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. And that's what we'll be exploring as we dive deeper into Kierkegaard's ideas.
All right, so we've got this picture of Kierkegaard as a bit of a rebel, going against the grain, challenging the philosophical norms of his time.
Yeah, he was definitely shaking things up.
But to really understand his ideas, we need to look at the context of his life.
Hmm. Absolutely. His personal experiences played a huge role in shaping his philosophy.
And I know we have some stuff on that. One thing that I keep coming across is this whole thing with his broken engagement to Regina Olsen.
Oh, yeah, that was a major turning point for him.
It sounds like that really messed him up, emotionally.
Yeah, it was a huge heartbreak. And, he broke off the engagement himself, and many scholars believe it was because he felt like his own inner struggles and his religious calling would make him an unsuitable husband.
So he basically sacrificed his own happiness for the sake of his beliefs.
It was a huge sacrifice, yeah. And it really fed into his ideas about love, commitment, and the nature of faith.
Wow. So this wasn't just some abstract philosophical debate for him.
Right.
It was deeply personal.
Oh, absolutely. His work is soaked in his own lived experience. It's raw, it's honest, it's vulnerable.
And I think that's what makes him so relatable.
Exactly.
Even though he was dealing with some pretty heavy concepts, there's this real human element to his work.
He was wrestling with these big questions in his own life, and he invites us to do the same.
And it sounds like that wrestling led him to develop some pretty radical ideas. One thing that I keep seeing pop up is this concept of the 3 spheres of existence.
Ah, yes, the spheres. A classic Kierkegaardian concept.
Right. And from what I understand, these are like different ways of approaching life, different ways of being in the world.
Yeah, think of them as different modes of existence, different lenses through which we can view reality.
Okay, and I think you said he called them the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious.
You got it. And each sphere has its own set of values, priorities, and ways of relating to the world.
So this is where we really get into the heart of Kierkegaard's philosophy, right?
It's where things get really juicy.
Okay, well, let's dive in then. Where should we start?
Well, I think a good place to begin is with the aesthetic sphere. It's often the most relatable entry point because it's the sphere of, sensory pleasure, immediate gratification, and the pursuit of beauty and excitement. Think of someone like Don Juan, always chasing after new conquests.
Right.
Or a dedicated artist who lives for those moments of creative inspiration.
Okay, so it's all about, like, living in the moment, experiencing life to the fullest. Sounds pretty fun to me.
Oh, it can be incredibly alluring. Kierkegaard understood the appeal of the aesthetic life, but he also saw its limitations.
What do you mean?
Well, he pointed out that a life purely focused on pleasure can eventually lead to boredom, even despair.
Because you're always chasing after the next thrill and it never quite satisfies.
Exactly. It's like you're on a hedonistic treadmill, always running but never getting anywhere.
And didn't he have this example of the wandering Jew?
Yes. The wandering Jew, eternally restless, never finding true peace.
So even though the ascetic life seems appealing on the surface, there's this potential for it to become empty and meaningless.
That's the danger Kierkegaard saw. He was warning us that the pursuit of pleasure, if it's all we have, can become a trap.
So where do we go from there? What's the alternative?
Well, that's where the ethical sphere comes in. It's about moving beyond those fleeting pleasures and embracing a life grounded in duty, responsibility, and moral principles.
Okay, so it's about doing what's right, not just what feels good.
Exactly. It's about living in accordance with your values, making choices based on what you believe is good and just.
But going back to what we talked about earlier about subjective truth, does that mean everyone gets to decide their own ethics?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that Kierkegaard grappled with, too. He saw the ethical life as an important step beyond the purely aesthetic, but he also recognized its potential pitfalls.
Like what?
Well, he worried about conformity, about people blindly following rules without really understanding why or considering individual circumstances.
So even in the ethical sphere, there's this need for individual discernment for figuring out what those choices should be based on your own values.
Absolutely. The ethical life can become just as empty as the aesthetic life if it's based solely on external rules and expectations.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about understanding why those rules exist.
Exactly.
And making conscious choices based on those principles.
You got it. It's about developing a deep understanding of what you believe is right and good, and then living in accordance with those beliefs.
Okay, that's making more sense now. But I'm also getting the feeling that there's something more, something beyond the ethical sphere.
You're picking up on something important there. And that something is where we move into the religious sphere, which, for Kierkegaard, represented the highest form of existence.
The religious sphere. Now, that sounds intriguing.
Oh, it's where things get really intense. And it's where we'll pick up next time.
I can't wait. So the religious sphere, this is where things get really deep with Kierkegaard, right?
This is it. This is where he really shines. It gets pretty intense in a good way.
And we were talking earlier about subjective truth and how that could be kind of scary.
Right.
Like, if we each get to decide what's true, doesn't that just lead to total chaos?
It's a valid concern. A lot of people worry about that.
Yeah. Like, how do we know what to believe if there's no objective standard?
Right. And Kierkegaard knew that was a tough one. He wasn't saying that, like, anything goes. He wasn't saying that truth is totally relative and that all beliefs are equal.
So what was he saying then?
He was saying that truth isn't something that's just handed to you.
Okay.
It's not like a set of facts you memorize or a rule book you follow.
It's more than that.
It's something you actively create, you participate in through your choices, through how you live, through your whole way of being in the world.
So it's not just about what you think. It's about how you act, how you live your life.
Yes. He was all about aligning your actions with your beliefs, walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
So it's about living authentically.
Authenticity, that's the key.
And I remember reading something about his criticism of Christendom.
Oh, yeah. He was not a fan of organized religion.
Was that because of the hypocrisy he saw?
Part of it, yeah. He saw people going through the motions of religious practice, following the rules, but not really grappling with their faith on a personal level.
So, like, they were living in the ethical sphere, doing what they thought was right, but not really taking that leap into the religious sphere.
They were playing it safe, staying on the surface.
Not really taking that risk, that, what do we call it, the leap of faith?
Exactly. He was saying that real faith, true religious commitment, requires more than just following the rules.
So what does it require?
It requires a willingness to question, to doubt, to wrestle with uncertainty. It demands that you confront the really big, hard questions about life, death, meaning.
So you're saying that faith is more about courageous questioning than blind acceptance?
Yes. For Kierkegaard, doubt wasn't the enemy of faith. It was a necessary part of it.
That's kind of a radical idea, isn't it?
It is. But he believed that by wrestling with doubt, by facing those uncomfortable questions head on,
you actually strengthen your faith.
So it's like the struggle itself is what deepens the faith.
The struggle refines it, purifies it. It's like forging metal in a fire.
Right. It becomes stronger.
It comes out stronger, more resilient. And it's something you've earned, not something just given to you.
It's more authentic.
Exactly.
And I think that idea of struggle, of wrestling with doubt even, that kind of connects back to his own writing style, doesn't it?
Oh, totally.
With all the pseudonyms and the indirect communication.
He's deliberately making things difficult.
Right. He's not giving us easy answers.
He's throwing out these fragments of thought, these different voices and perspectives.
Right.
And he's challenging us to make sense of it all.
It's like he's saying, here are the pieces. Now you figure out how to put the puzzle together.
Yes. And it can be frustrating, but also really rewarding.
I can see that. So we've talked a lot about philosophy and subjective truth and this idea of struggle.
Yeah.
But I want to bring it back to the three spheres.
We touched on the aesthetic and the ethical spheres.
Right.
But we haven't really dug into the religious sphere yet. And it seems like that's where things really get intense for Kierkegaard, where he sees the greatest potential for human fulfillment.
Absolutely. He believed that the religious sphere was the highest, most fulfilling mode of existence. But it's also the most demanding.
In what way?
Well, for Kierkegaard, it wasn't just about belonging to a particular religion or following a set of doctrines.
Right.
It was about a radical transformation of the self. It was about a total surrender to something beyond yourself.
Like a higher power.
Yes. It was about a complete commitment, a leap of faith into the unknown.
Okay, so this is where that leap of faith idea really comes into play.
Full force.
Yeah.
And he uses the story of Abraham and Isaac to illustrate this point.
Oh, right. That's the one where God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son.
Exactly. It seems totally crazy, unethical even.
Right.
But for Kierkegaard, it represents the ultimate expression of faith. It's about being willing to obey even when it doesn't make sense, even when it goes against all human reason.
Wow. It's like that saying, faith is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase.
Yes, that's a perfect way to put it.
But how do we know when we're supposed to take that leap?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that people believe in, and some of it's pretty harmful. How do we know the difference between a true leap of faith and just blind fanaticism.
There's no easy answer.
Yeah, figured.
It's a process of discernment, of being honest with yourself about what you truly believe and why, of testing your faith against reason and experience.
So it's not about just feeling good or following the crowd.
Nope. It's about something deeper, something more authentic.
More real.
Exactly. It's about a deep inner conviction that's been tested and refined through struggle and doubt.
That sounds really challenging.
It is, but it's also incredibly rewarding.
Okay, so we've got this religious sphere, this realm of radical commitment and surrender. But even within that sphere, there are different levels of engagement, right?
Definitely. Kierkegaard talks about this figure he calls the Knight of Faith.
The Knight of Faith. That sounds pretty intense.
It is.
Yeah.
This is someone who has completely surrendered to God, who lives in this state of constant paradox.
Paradox.
Yeah, like embracing both the absurdity and the sublimity of faith.
Okay, so it's not about achieving some perfect, unwavering belief.
Nope.
It's more about holding on to that belief even when it's challenged, even when it doesn't make sense.
Right. The Knight of Faith lives with that tension, that paradox of
Yeah.
believing in something that can't be proven, that defies logic and reason.
And that tension, that paradox is what gives their faith its power.
Exactly. It's what makes it real, authentic.
You know, this reminds me of something we talked about earlier, Kierkegaard's use of indirect communication.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, it's like he's using those same techniques, those same paradoxes,
Yeah.
to communicate his ideas about faith.
That's a great connection. He's not giving us a straightforward, easy-to-digest explanation.
Right.
He's using stories and metaphors and even humor and irony to try to make us feel what faith is rather than just telling us.
So it's not just about reading his words. It's about experiencing them.
Exactly. He wants us to wrestle with these ideas, to feel their weight, to let them challenge us.
It's like he wants us to go on that same journey of faith that he went on.
Yes. And it's a journey that can be challenging, but also incredibly transformative.
You know, it's funny because we've been talking about this like in terms of religion and philosophy,
Yeah.
but it feels like these leaps of faith, they can show up in so many other parts of life too, you know?
Oh, absolutely. I think about relationships,
Yeah.
creative endeavors, even like career decisions.
Right. Like anytime you're really committing to something,
Yeah.
putting yourself out there, there's that element of risk.
There's that unknown.
Yeah.
That leap you have to take.
And maybe that's just part of being human. Like we can't control everything. We can't always know what's going to happen.
Nope.
So we're kind of always taking these leaps of faith even when we don't realize it.
Yeah. I love that. I think Kierkegaard would totally agree with you. He saw faith as this really fundamental part of what it means to be human.
So it's not just about religion then.
Right. It's about believing in something bigger than yourself, something that gives your life meaning, something worth striving for.
And that's something that can be different for everyone, right?
Exactly.
It's not like there's this one right answer for everybody.
Nope. And that's what makes Kierkegaard so, I don't know, refreshing, I guess. He's not like giving us a rule book or a dogma to follow. He's saying, hey, go out there and figure out what matters to you.
Yeah.
What are you passionate about?
What are you willing to take a risk for?
Yeah. What do you believe in?
But that can be kind of scary, right?
Oh, definitely.
It's a lot easier to just follow the crowd.
Yeah.
You know?
Way easier.
Like do what everybody else is doing, think what everybody else is thinking.
Yeah, it's comfortable, it's safe.
But is it really fulfilling? I mean, is that really living a true, authentic life?
That's the question Kierkegaard is pushing us to ask, you know?
Yeah.
He's saying that true fulfillment comes from living a life that's in line with your own values, your own understanding of truth, even if that understanding is always evolving.
So it's not about like finding this one perfect answer and then just sticking with that forever.
No.
It's more about the journey.
The journey, yeah. It's about being open to new experiences, new ideas, new perspectives. It's about constantly questioning and growing.
That can be uncomfortable.
Sure, yeah, it can be.
I mean, like who really wants to question everything all the time? It's exhausting.
Totally. But I think that's where the real growth happens.
So it's like those leaps of faith. It's that willingness to step into the unknown, even when it's scary.
Yes, it's about embracing uncertainty, trusting that you'll figure it out along the way.
It's about trusting the process.
I like that, trusting the process.
You know, listening to all this, it's really striking how relevant Kierkegaard still feels today.
Yeah.
I mean, we're living in a world that's changing so fast.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to keep up.
Right.
We're bombarded with information. Everyone's telling us what to think, what to believe.
It's a lot of noise to filter through.
It is. And in the midst of all that, I think Kierkegaard's message is, like, more important now than ever.
Oh, I agree. He's like this voice cutting through all the chaos, saying, hey, slow down, think for yourself.
Yeah.
What do you believe? What matters to you?
Don't just accept what you're told.
Yeah, question everything.
Figure it out for yourself.
Become your own authority.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Kierkegaard,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you really want our listener to take away from this?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Kierkegaard is an invitation. He's inviting us to think critically, to question everything, to embrace the struggle of figuring it all out.
And to find our own meaning, our own truth.
Exactly. He's not going to give us the answers.
Right.
He wants us to go on that journey ourselves.
To take those leaps of faith, even when we don't know where we'll land.
Beautiful.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to leave it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Søren Kierkegaard. Hopefully you've got more questions than answers now.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. And hopefully you're feeling inspired to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep taking those leaps of faith. Until next time.